Jacob Stewart was a man shaped by the environment in which he grew up. At 43 years old, he lived in a small rural town where traditional values still dictated the pace of life. As the owner of a local transportation company, Jacob was known for being straightforward, disciplined, and often unyielding. His world was black and white, both figuratively and literally. Since childhood, Jacob had learned from his father that black people were inferior, an idea he never questioned. After the sudden death of his wife, Emily, from a devastating illness, Jacob took on the responsibility of raising Nathan, his only son. Though he loved Nathan deeply, his parenting style was cold and rigid. For Jacob, showing weakness was unacceptable, and he made it a point to teach Nathan to respect the family's traditions. Nathan, on the other hand, was a sweet and imaginative child. He loved dinosaurs, adventure books, and secretly befriended classmates whom Jacob would disapprove of if he knew. The boy sensed his father's strictness, but loved him nonetheless. With his mother gone, Nathan constantly sought Jacob's approval, even if it meant suppressing his own curiosity about the world. Elsewhere in town lived Darnell Carter, a dedicated firefighter and family man. At 37 years old, Darnell had spent over a decade in the fire department and was known for his bravery and calm demeanor in high-stress situations. He was married to Serena, a history teacher, and was the proud father of a teenage daughter, Layla, who was preparing to start college. Darnell was no stranger to being judged by the color of his skin. He had grown up enduring suspicious looks and hurtful comments, but refused to let them define him. His passion for helping others came from his mother, a nurse who had taught him the importance of saving lives. For Darnell, each day was a new opportunity to make a difference, even when the world didn't always seem fair. While Jacob spent his days trying to instill his beliefs in Nathan, Darnell and Serena were teaching Layla to face the world with dignity and courage. Their paths were different, but fate was about to connect them in an unexpected way. That morning, Jacob decided to take Nathan to visit relatives in a nearby town. Despite the unstable weather and slippery roads, he insisted on making the trip. Nathan, with his little feet swinging from the back seat, played with a plastic dinosaur, blissfully unaware of the danger ahead. The steady sound of rain against the windshield created an uneasy rhythm for their drive. The winding road seemed endless, flanked by tall trees and a mist that made visibility difficult. Jacob, gripping the steering wheel tightly, barely noticed Nathan enthusiastically describing the adventures of the Tyrannosaurus Rex in his hand. His focus was fixed on reaching their destination as quickly as possible. And then it happened. As Jacob navigated a sharp curve, the car lost traction. He tried to regain control, but the tires skidded on the wet pavement. The vehicle spun out before plunging down an embankment. The impact was brutal. The air filled with the sound of screeching metal and Jacob's shout as the car tumbled, finally coming to rest upside down. When Jacob regained consciousness, the first thing he noticed was the smell of gasoline. The windows were shattered, and he realized he was trapped by his seatbelt. Turning his head with difficulty, he saw Nathan in the back seat, unconscious, with a cut on his forehead. "Nathan, wake up, son," he yelled, but his voice trembled. Panic set in. Jacob struggled to free himself, but the seatbelt wouldn't budge. As flames began to creep up the car, he screamed for help, something he rarely did. The man who prided himself on self-reliance was now completely vulnerable. Minutes that felt like hours passed before sirens pierced the eerie silence of the forest. The sound brought a glimmer of hope, but also a new wave of fear. Jacob remained trapped as the fire grew. Darnell was part of the rescue team that arrived on the scene. Assessing the situation quickly, he prioritized saving the child. With steady precision, Darnell broke the rear window and carefully pulled Nathan to safety. Despite the weight of his gear and the intense heat, he maintained his composure, carrying the boy away from the flames. Jacob watched helplessly as Darnell worked. When the firefighter returned to rescue him, the fire was already consuming the car's interior. "I'm going to get you out. Trust me," Darnell said firmly, using a tool to cut through Jacob's seatbelt. Within seconds, Jacob was freed and dragged to safety, injured but alive. As he was loaded into the ambulance, all he could think about was how close he'd come to losing everything. The man who had always believed in his own racial superiority was about to face a life-altering lesson. The sound of sirens faded as Jacob and Nathan were rushed to the hospital. While Jacob's physical pain was dulled by adrenaline, his mind remained fixated on his son's condition. He didn't know what to think but felt an overwhelming sense of relief that they were alive. Outside, Darnell and his team secured the crash site, ensuring the car fire didn't spread. Another job done, Darnell thought. Saving lives was just part of the routine, a mission he had embraced without expecting recognition. Back at the firehouse, he exchanged a few words with his colleagues, took a quick shower, and headed home, where Serena greeted him with a warm plate of food. Meanwhile, Jacob was at the hospital, waiting anxiously for updates on Nathan. Thankfully, the doctors soon confirmed that the boy was out of danger, with only a few scratches and a mild concussion. Jacob, on the other hand, needed stitches on his arm and was advised to rest to recover from the muscle strain. The nurses and doctors started talking about the bravery of the firefighters who responded to the accident. One of the nurses enthusiastically shared, "The firefighter who saved your son was incredible. He didn't hesitate for a second before getting into the burning car to pull the boy out." Jacob listened silently. Pride and prejudice still wrestled in his mind, trying to justify his feelings. He had always believed that black people were incapable of great deeds, but now, his life, and more importantly, his son's life, was in the hands of someone who defied all his biases. Later, an officer from the fire department came by the hospital to document the details of the rescue. That's when Jacob heard the name of the man who had saved his son for the first time, Darnell Carter. The officer's tone and name left no doubt. Darnell was black. Jacob swallowed hard. Suddenly, the gratitude he felt for having his son alive clashed with the prejudice he had carried for years. He froze, unable to react immediately. The truth hit him like a punch. Everything he believed was wrong, and he knew it. Jacob spent the rest of the day restless at the hospital. He looked at Nathan, now sleeping peacefully in the bed beside him, feeling a mix of shame and relief. The nurse's words echoed in his mind. "The firefighter who saved your son was incredible." He tried to rationalize his thoughts, but nothing made sense anymore. The fact that someone he would have dismissed without a second thought risked his life for Nathan shattered all his beliefs. For years, he had judged people solely by the color of their skin, but now, that belief seemed as hollow as the excuses he once used to justify it. As night fell, Jacob stepped into the hallway and, after hesitating, asked a nurse, "Do you have the contact information for the firefighter? I want to thank him personally." The nurse smiled. "Of course, sir. I can ask him to stop by tomorrow. He's an amazing man. I'm sure you'll like him." Jacob nodded but felt a knot of fear in his stomach. He knew he would have to face not just Darnell, but also himself. Meanwhile, Darnell was at home with his family, unaware of the inner conflict he had triggered in the man he had saved. He shared the story of the rescue with his wife, Serena, and their daughter, Layla, but without much detail. To him, it was just another day on the job. The next morning, Jacob was informed that Darnell would stop by the hospital to check on Nathan. When the moment came and Jacob finally saw him, he felt a lump in his throat. There stood Darnell, tall, wearing a crisp uniform and exuding a calm demeanor. "Are you Nathan's father?" Darnell asked, extending his hand with a warm smile. Jacob hesitated before shaking his hand. For the first time in his life, he felt the weight of his ignorance and the greatness of the man standing before him. His words came out choked. "Thank you for saving my son." Darnell nodded, unaware of Jacob's internal battle. "It's my job. I'm just glad he's okay." Jacob wanted to say more but couldn't. He stood there, watching Darnell leave the room. Inside, a storm was brewing. Everything he believed was unraveling, and he realized that if he didn't change, he'd remain trapped in a narrow and destructive mindset. Life had given Jacob a second chance and an opportunity to see the world differently. But he knew that transformation would be a long and painful journey. The following morning brought more than just sunlight into the hospital room. It brought resolve. After a sleepless night staring at the ceiling and listening to Nathan's steady breathing, Jacob made a decision. He needed to meet Darnell again, not just to thank him, but to confront the prejudices he had carried his entire life. Jacob asked the hospital reception for the contact information of the fire station. In an act he never thought he'd make, he called and asked if Darnell could meet with him briefly. On the other end, a friendly voice replied, "He's just finishing his shift now. I'll let him know." A few hours later, Jacob and Nathan were waiting at a park near the hospital. The boy still had a bandage on his forehead, but was well enough to play on a swing while Jacob waited nervously. When Darnell arrived, walking calmly toward them, Jacob's heart raced. "Mr. Stewart, good to see you again. How's Nathan doing?" Darnell asked, crouching down to greet the boy. Nathan gave a shy smile. "Thank you for saving me, sir." Darnell smiled and ruffled the boy's hair. "You're brave. I bet you'll be telling this story for years." Jacob, on the other hand, was still struggling to find the right words. He looked at Darnell, noticing something he had never allowed himself to see before. The humanity in the man standing before him. A father. A hero. Someone willing to risk his life for strangers. "Can I speak with you for a moment?" Jacob asked, stepping a little away from Nathan. Darnell nodded, and the two walked over to a nearby bench. Jacob took a deep breath before starting. "I need to be honest. When I heard your name at the hospital and found out it was you who saved my son, I felt confused." Darnell raised an eyebrow but stayed silent, letting Jacob continue. "I grew up believing that people like you," Jacob hesitated, the weight of his words choking him, "weren't capable of doing great things. That's terrible, I know. But the truth is, I carried those prejudices with me my whole life." Darnell crossed his arms, but his expression remained calm. He had heard words like these before, but there was something about Jacob's raw honesty that made him pause and listen. "And now?" Darnell asked quietly. Jacob ran a hand over his face, as if trying to wipe away years of ignorance. "And now, I see how wrong I was. You saved my son. You risked your life for him, even without knowing who we were. It made me realize that my view of the world was small, limited, and unfair." A silence hung between them for a moment before Jacob spoke again. "I just want to say I'm sorry, not just to you, but to everyone I've judged without knowing them. And more than that, I want to change. I want to teach my son something different, something I never knew. That the value of a person is in what they do, not the color of their skin." Darnell nodded slowly, recognizing the sincerity in Jacob's voice. "You know, Mr. Stewart, change is never easy. But admitting where we've gone wrong is a big step." Jacob felt a weight lift from his shoulders, but Darnell wasn't done yet. "My job is to save lives, no matter who they are. But my greatest hope is that the people I save live in a way that honors the gift they've been given. If you really want to change, start now." Jacob swallowed hard and nodded. "I will." The two men stood, shaking hands firmly. Darnell, with a quiet smile, said goodbye to Nathan before walking away. As Jacob watched the firefighter leave, he felt something inside him shift forever. That encounter didn't just save Nathan's life. It saved Jacob's soul, too. For the first time, he truly understood the greatness of a selfless act. He knew his transformation would be a long road, but he was willing to walk it. It all began there, with a simple but powerful lesson. The courage to admit he was wrong and the determination to become better. Did you enjoy the story? Subscribe to the channel, share your thoughts in the comments, and pass it along to inspire others.